Hey there, fellow learner. You ever get the feeling that organizations are kind of hardwired to resist change?
Oh, tell me about it.
Like you come in with a brilliant idea and suddenly it feels like you're trying to move a mountain just to get things off the ground?
It can be a real uphill battle.
For sure. So in today's deep dive, we're going to equip you with some serious aha moments that'll hopefully make those battles a little easier.
I'm ready.
We're diving into Larman's Laws of Organizational Behavior.
Always a good topic.
Now, before we get too far, these aren't laws like gravity or anything.
Right.
They're more like universal truths about companies.
Like those things that make you nod your head and go, yep, been there.
Exactly.
They really resonate with anyone who's ever tried to shake things up a bit.
And they're especially relevant to you since you're looking at agile transformations, right?
Absolutely. This is going to be eye-opening.
So law one,
Mm.
organizations are implicitly optimized to avoid changing the status quo.
They really are.
It's like they have this built-in immune system against new ideas.
It's true. And in some ways, that's not always a bad thing. I mean, stability is obviously super important for any organization.
For sure. Keeps the lights on.
Exactly. But here's the thing. This optimization for keeping things as they are, well, it often means that power structures and budgets and even just the way people think, it's all geared toward maintaining the current state.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Not necessarily what's best for future growth or innovation, you know?
So instead of being designed to adapt and change, they're designed to resist it.
In a nutshell.
Gotcha. That makes total sense. But can you give me a real-world example of how this optimization for no change actually shows up?
Okay, imagine this. You're trying to bring in a more collaborative way of working, right?
That sounds good so far.
But the way the company's budget is structured, it's all based on individual departments with zero incentive for them to share resources.
I see the clash.
Right. That's Larmans Law 1 in action.
Wow. Okay, that's a super concrete example.
It's those hidden structures that can really trip you up.
And I bet this leads perfectly into Law 2, which is all about that human element we were talking about.
Oh, absolutely.
Law 2 states, any change initiative draws criticism from those whose power or status is threatened.
It's like clockwork.
You know, it's the old, if it ain't broke, don't fix it crew.
Oh, I've met them.
Haven't we all?
Yeah.
But is it always because they're just being difficult?
That's a great question. And I think it's important to remember that it's human nature to resist change, especially when your sense of security, your influence, your whole position is tied to the existing way of doing things.
Okay, so it's like a self-preservation thing.
Exactly. It's not always coming from a place of malice.
That's a good point.
You see, change often leads to a shift in power dynamics, right?
Right.
And those who benefited from the old way of doing things might see this shift as a threat.
Even if, objectively, the change is a good thing for everyone.
Precisely. It's all about perspective.
That's a really helpful way to reframe those situations for sure. Okay, so if Law 2 is about individuals resisting change, Law 3 seems to focus on a specific group within organizations. Middle managers.
Ah, yes, the middle managers.
It says, the status quo of middle managers is to be preserved by default.
Interesting, isn't it?
So does this mean middle managers are like the ultimate roadblock to making any change happen?
I wouldn't say they're a roadblock necessarily,
Right.
but they're definitely in a tricky spot.
How so?
Well, think about it, right? Their job, a lot of the time, is all about maintaining stability.
Keeping things running smoothly.
Exactly. Hitting those quarterly targets, making sure the existing system is humming along.
Right.
So when big changes come along, it can feel like a threat to all of that.
Because it disrupts the very system they're responsible for upholding.
Exactly. It's not like they're resisting change just for the fun of it.
So it's more about protecting their turf in a way.
In a way, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's precisely why this article really emphasizes making middle managers partners in change.
Instead of what? Just trying to steamroll over their concerns.
Exactly. Don't make them the enemy.
Make them part of the solution.
Exactly.
Okay, but how do you actually do that? Because I don't know about you, but I've heard be more collaborative about 1,000,000 times, and it's not exactly a step-by-step guide, right?
You're telling me. Luckily, this article actually gets into specifics.
Okay.
One big one is involving middle managers super early in the process.
Like from the very beginning.
From the get-go. And not just telling them what's going to happen, but actually asking for their input.
Oh, interesting. So actually making them feel heard and valued.
Yes, because they have that on-the-ground perspective that's so valuable.
Instead of it just being like, okay, here's the new plan, now you have to implement it.
Exactly.
That's huge,
Yeah.
because then it becomes less about this top-down initiative that's being forced upon them,
Right.
and more about them being part of making it happen.
Absolutely. And the article also talks about giving them clear roles and responsibilities within the change initiative.
Okay, that makes sense.
Because if they feel like they have ownership, like a real stake in the success of the change.
They're way more likely to be on board.
It's exactly.
It's like, I'm not just being told to do this, I'm actually part of making it happen.
Yes. And don't underestimate the power of training and development either.
Oh, right. Give them the tools they need to actually succeed.
Exactly. Giving middle managers the skills and knowledge they need to thrive in this new environment.
Instead of just assuming they'll figure it out.
Yes. It's about equipping them for success, not just expecting them to adapt overnight.
I love that.
Okay.
Okay, you ready for Larmans Law 4?
Hit me with it.
This one kind of blew my mind a little bit.
Okay, let's hear it.
Culture follows structure.
Interesting.
Wait, so you're telling me that just by changing the organizational chart,
Yeah.
you can actually shift a company's entire culture?
Well, it's not quite that simple, but there's definitely a really strong connection there.
How so?
Well, think about it, right? You can't just slap a "we're collaborative now" poster on the wall and expect everything to magically change.
Yeah. Sadly, motivational posters only go so far.
Exactly. Culture runs deeper than that.
Right.
But if you actually change the structure of how teams work,
Okay.
like if you break down those silos, build in systems for information to flow more freely,
Yeah.
well, then you're actually changing the environment, right?
Yeah, the actual work environment, not just the decorations.
Exactly. And it's the environment that really shapes behavior, which ultimately shapes culture.
So to bring this back to that agile transformation we were talking about,
Yes.
it's not enough to just start having daily stand-ups and using Jira boards.
Right.
You actually have to restructure the company in a way that supports those agile values.
Exactly. You have to align the structure with the behaviors you want to see.
So if you want agility,
Yeah.
you need a structure that allows for quick decision-making, adaptable teams, a continuous feedback loop.
Exactly. You've got to bake it into the DNA of the organization.
Which is probably where a lot of companies trying to go agile stumble, right?
Oh, absolutely.
They focus so much on the rituals,
The tools, the jargon.
but not the underlying structure.
It's like trying to bake a cake with all the ingredients, but no oven.
Perfect analogy. Okay, so we've covered these 4 laws of organizational behavior, which are already incredibly insightful.
They really are.
But the article we're diving into today, it doesn't stop there.
Oh.
It goes on to talk about the importance of not just change, but a continuous improvement mindset.
Interesting.
What does that look like in practice? So it's less about fearing these big dramatic changes and more about, embracing those smaller improvements as a constant.
Yeah, like making it part of the culture.
Which, honestly, when you think about it, it's a lot closer to how the real world works anyway, right?
Sure.
Things are constantly evolving.
Absolutely. And that actually ties in really well with Larmans Laws, because they highlight how organizations, just like living organisms, they need to adapt to survive.
Oh, I love that analogy.
It's this constant dance between stability and change.
Finding that balance.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so just as a reminder for our learner listening in, we're talking about all this because they were specifically interested in how organizations change, and particularly around this idea of agile transformations, which can be a pretty big change for companies.
For sure. And something I think is super important to remember, especially in that context, is making sure that any change initiative, it's got to be aligned with the overall goals of the organization.
Because otherwise it just feels random and pointless, right?
Exactly. You can't just say, okay, everybody, we're going agile now because it's trendy.
Or because we read about it in a blog post.
Right. It has to connect back to that bigger picture,
How is this actually going to help us reach our goals? How is this going to make us more competitive?
Exactly. You have to answer that why question for people.
Make them feel like it's not just change for the sake of change.
Exactly. It's about helping them see how this change, even if it's disruptive in the short term, it's ultimately going to benefit everyone in the long run.
It's that long-term vision, right?
Yes.
Awesome. Well, we've covered a lot of ground here today. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one big takeaway you hope our learner walks away with?
I think it's that change, especially within an organization, it's rarely simple or straightforward.
It's messy.
It really is. It's not just about implementing new rules or
It's
structures.
about people, right?
Exactly. It's about understanding that human element, like those deep-seated behaviors and power dynamics that Larman talks about in his laws.
Yeah, and once you understand those dynamics, you can actually use them to your advantage, right?
Exactly. It's not about trying to fight against human nature. It's about working with it.
To create change that actually sticks.
Love it. Well, learner, that's it for this deep dive into Larman's Laws. We hope you found it insightful and maybe even a little bit inspiring. Now, here's something to ponder as you go about your week. Think about your current work environment. Where do you see these laws playing out, maybe even in those subtle ways we talked about? And how can you use this knowledge, this new understanding, to navigate those situations a little more effectively? Until next time, happy learning.